The makers of 20th century Peru. Fisheries and Carlos Sotomayor. Chapter 1.
The sea plays a leading role in the life of all Peruvians. In the past century, Peruvians witnessed how guano, then one of the world's greatest marine sources of wealth, was squandered. By the turn of the century, the sea had lost most of its importance and was not even a significant source of food for Peruvians. In 1921, when we celebrated our first centennial as a republic, fishing was a negligible economic activity. In the 1940s, Peruvians started the long march to the sea. In the last few years, the fishing industry has become the fast-growing sector of the economy. In 1993, Peru exported over 2 million tons of fishing products. We can't imagine contemporary 20th century Peru without the fisheries industry. Peruvians built the fishing industry. Entrepreneurs and fishermen, the bankers that provided the capitals and the technical experts were and still are Peruvians. Peru's sea feeds not just this country, it nourishes a large part of the world. And among the men who shaped the industry is Carlos Sotomayor, born in Lima's port of Callao. A salesman at heart, he was bound to conquer distant European, Oriental, and African markets for Peru's fish. Carlos was born on September 18, 1923 in Callao, son to Manuel Sotomayor and Rosa Delia Cabañin. At that time, 214 Washington Street was home to the Sotomayors, and on that same street, he first attended a small private school headed by the Prado sisters. He studied his first and second years of grade school at the renowned Sabogal Institute. Overcoming religious prejudice, his father sent him to the Anglo-Peruvian high school headed and staffed by Protestant ministers. As a future businessman, Carlos was expected to master English impeccably, and he reached his goal. Augusto B. Leguía was at the time president of Peru, a country living the roaring years of Charleston and Mardi Gras parades. But the frivolous years came to an abrupt end when Commander Luis M. Sánchez Cerro rebelled in Peru's second largest city of Arequipa and toppled Leguía to become president of Peru. In turn, Sánchez Cerro was succeeded by General Benavides. In 1936, Peruvian athletes who had taken part in the 1936 Berlin Olympics arrived victorious in Callao.
El primer suceso que viene a mi memoria.
My first memory is the arrival of our Olympic athletes from Berlin in 1936.
Yo tenía 13 años de edad.
I was 13,
Todo el Callao
and all Callao turned to the streets for their welcome.
En Lima los recibió el
In
presidente
Lima,
de la
they were
República.
received by the president.
Los peruanos, se decía,
The Peruvian athletes, they said, had fought with their fists when the result of an Olympic soccer match was invalidated. And the whole delegation left the games.
peruanos se retiraron de la Olimpiada.
They arrived in Callao by ship,
En barco.
and soccer team players Lola Fernandez, Adolfo Magallanes, Drago, Valle became household names.
World War II broke in 1939 when Hitler launched his troops against Poland. In December, Manuel Prado was elected president of Peru. A few months later, a great tragedy overcame Peru. Callao, May 24, 1940, 11:33 a.m. The earth started shaking. In a few seconds, the city was practically leveled to the ground in a terribly violent quake that killed hundreds, left thousands injured, and caused incalculable losses.
Acabamos de terminar un examen de contabilidad cuando de repente comienza
We
a
had
temblar,
just finished an accounting
comienza
test
a moverse,
when the
entonces
ground
el
suddenly
profesor,
started shaking.
señor Ferreira,
Professor
nos dice,
Ferreira
no corre,
told us not to move,
tranquilos, ahí nomás
to remain
tranquilos.
quiet.
De repente sale un alumno de quinto
Unexpectedly,
año y medio que
a
está
senior
bien
high
serio,
school
disparó corriendo.
student darted towards the door, and we followed him, and so did the teacher.
Llegando a la
When we reached the main gate, the
puerta,
plaster on the walls of the school began to
vemos
fall.
que comienza a caerse
By
ahí
the way,
el
that's
techo
where the Sport Boys soccer club facility stands
sí, en
today.
el colegio. Es casualmente lo que es el Sport
I
Boys,
saw the
¿no? El local
plaster
de Sport
fall,
Boys. Veo
and the
que
boys
comienza
who
a
came
caerse.
behind
Los muchachos
pushed
querían
those
hacerlo,
ahead.
había pánico.
I realized that they
Los
had
que estamos
panicked.
adelante. Yo lo que recuerdo es
I can only remember lying on the floor. A brick seemed to have hit
parece
me,
que me cayó un
and I
alucín
threw
en el
myself
suelo.
down.
Y yo
I
estaba
was in
en
the
una
midst of a
polvadera,
storm dust, choking,
asfixiándome y
and was
nadando,
scrambling on the floor,
buscando aire, nadando,
trying
no
to
solo
catch
ni
some
nada,
fresh air.
nadando, buscando aire.
I got on my feet,
Me
and I
levantaron
heard
y
somebody
entonces,
say,
escuchado, ¿no?
"Some guys are
Hay
buried.
muchachos
We have to
sentados,
help
hay que
them."
ayudarlos, efectivamente.
2
Murieron
died.
dos.
As a result of the war and despite the earthquake, Callao gained in importance. The Germans had invaded Norway, and Hitler launched a great offensive. His troops swarmed over Belgium and Holland. The English were pushed to the sea at Dunkirk, and not much later, the Germans paraded into Paris under the Arch of Triumph before the French incredulous and weeping eyes. But in Callao, the fishing entrepreneurs were enthusiastic. Some Peruvian companies were exporting striped tuna liver in brine to the United States.
Sin quererlo, Hitler ayudó
By
a los
invading
pesqueros
Norway
peruanos
and
al
cutting
inveder
exports of
Noruega
cod liver,
en 1940,
an indispensable raw
e
material
impedir
for
la
making
exportación
vitamin
de
D,
hígado de bacalao.
Hitler unwittingly helped Peruvian fisheries.
Indispensable para la fabricación de
Americans
vitamina
searched
D.
the world for a substitute,
Los americanos
and
buscaron
several Peruvian
un
companies
sustituto.
were exporting striped tuna liver in
Encontraron
brine
el
to
hígado
the United
de bonito
States.
en el Perú.
Those were
Fueron
years
años
of
de
great
enorme
enthusiasm.
entusiasmo.
In 1941, there were only 3,600 registered non-industrial fishing vessels. Of those, only 120 were engine-powered. That year, Wilbur Ellis, an American company, opened an office in Peru to sell machinery, equipment, and inputs for the fishing industry. They were looking for Peruvian partners. Belligerent countries needed food. Peruvian fisheries grew by the day. In 1941, German troops accomplished another feat when they invaded the Mediterranean Isle of Crete. Paratroopers fell from the sky. That same year, Ecuadorian troops invaded Peruvian territory. A few days later, though, Peru astonished the world when airborne troops occupied the Ecuadorian province of El Oro. Military glory covered Lieutenant Jose Abelardo Quiñones at Quebrada Seca. Not much later, both countries signed the Rio de Janeiro Treaty that settled once and for all their border differences. At that time, the Sotomayors were hit by tragedy. Beba, one of their children and the only earthquake survivor in her school class, died in an accident. Fishing in Callao moved full speed ahead, but the Sotomayors were not yet interested. In the 40s, Peru exported canned striped tuna with a tuna fish label, and the industry managed to place an annual record of 50,000 tons. The number of fishing companies rose from 2 to 30, with investments over $50 million. Peruvians, though, soon learned that fisheries is a box of surprises. Not long before the end of the war, a way was found to make artificial vitamin D, and striped tuna liver went out of fashion. Peruvian fishermen found themselves with empty hands and pockets. 1945 saw the election of President José Luis Bustamante y Rivero, and in 1946, Carlos Sotomayor married Violeta de Azambuja Reyes.
In those years, schoolboys and girls would stroll down Science Peña Street, then called the Lima Street, a trysting place where many of us met for the first time. As I walked towards the party at the Azambujas on Polo Street, we stopped to watch the dancers, and I asked, "Who's that one over there?" I liked her and fell for her. She was my first and only love.
Starting a family meant for Carlos working even harder than he had done since graduating from high school.
I started working as soon as I graduated from high school. I worked for Imaco, a domestic appliances retailer. Later on, I went to work with the Hemisphere's first airline, and I even made it to office manager. I was elected to be the Union Secretary of Internal Affairs. My good command of English opened all doors, and in my spare time, which was not much, I moonlighted as a translator. I worked as if I was in a competition or a work marathon.
Fisheries grew at a dizzying clip, with more and more companies getting into the business. So Sotomayor had long since made a decision. He knew the present and future of Peru rested on its fish exports.
At
24 years old, I had gained considerable experience, which can be summarized in a few basic principles. The wealth of the sea was the fish, and not the guano that was accumulated on the islands. This was a basic idea that had to be imposed. The sea was the stage for cyclic changes on a worldwide scale. These changes were then very difficult to predict. It was indispensable to invest in scientific research. Therefore, the exportation of sea products required worldwide planning and constant adjustment of the Peruvian industry to the unpredictable variations in the sea resource. In summary, Peru needed a fishing policy as a function of the world market.
A supreme decree signed by President Bustamante Rivero in 1947 established Peru's sovereignty over its territorial sea to a distance of 200 miles from the shore. This decree was a historical milestone for the world's fishing industry. This trust was the first reaction of the world powers. Although nobody discusses anymore the validity of this juridical principle, ever since, Peru has been not only the largest supplier of fish to the world, but also the most important international center of juridical studies on the law of the sea. General Manuel Odría came to power in 1948 and was elected president in 1950. He enforced Peruvian legislation and captured and fined Aristotle Onassis ships that illegally sailed in Peruvian waters. Years later, Onassis married President John F. Kennedy's widow, but he never forgot his bad experience in Peru's sea. Manuel Prado was re-elected to the presidency in 1956. 1957 was a bad year for Peruvian entrepreneurs. salmon returned to Canadian and Japanese waters, and Great Britain stopped buying Peruvian canned fish.